Hi, this is Dr. Nazare coming to you again with some psychological information. And today I'm going to be talking about something that is kind of amazing to uncover and not very well known for the general population, which are ways in which we protect from pain and suffering, particularly when we're young, and that end up causing two ways of protecting that affect what we know and what we're aware of in the present. It affects it in the past also, but it continues to affect it into the present when you're an adult, in new relationships with other adults, at work, in all kinds of circumstances. So one thing I want to start by mentioning is that it's very important to understand that for many years, really, until we're verbal, which is about 2 years, 2.5 years, we do have experiences that are painful, sometimes cause anguish to a child. And we do experience pain and suffering, and we do get injured. But we don't have language. So the result of not having language is we don't have a story to go with it. So that I want to make people aware of, because what I want to talk about today is the situations where you experience emotions, strong emotions, that you experience, fairly frequently. However, you don't really know why. You have no idea why this emotion is coming to you. And the emotion could be fear, it could be sadness, it could, and this leads to typically avoiding things. To prevent us from having this experience. So one of the ways that we don't know what the pain is, where the pain is coming from, is because it happened before we were verbal. So we don't have a story, we don't have a narrative. That's one way. Another thing to remember is that from the age that we become verbal, around 2.5 or so, to 7, we don't remember a lot either. We have very powerful experiences that really affect us, but we remember some, but not a lot. So it's really important, because I think most of us don't know that. And the part that I want to talk about today is for those of us, and I'm one of them, that have emotions that are intense and powerful, but we don't really know why they're arising. And in my experience, when we don't know why they're arising, it's actually even more painful, because we can't make sense of it. And we don't understand why these emotions are surfacing. So number one, that we don't have narrative before we're verbal. That's one way that we don't know. Number two, even up to 7 years of age, we don't remember very much, but we could remember some. And then the crux of the matter of today that I'm going to talk about is two ways in which we protect ourselves when we're young, typically. Because when we're young, as I've said before, we're very vulnerable and we are in tremendous need of care from our parents, our caretakers. And when that goes wrong, we are injured many times over what we would be if we were adults. So one way in which this happens is that when we are young and, again, very dependent, and we are gravely injured, and if the pain is extremely strong, we are not able to manage that as children. So one way in which we survive that is by using repression. Now, I shouldn't say using, because it's an unconscious process. It's a defense, and nobody chooses to repress. It just happens. It's like an automatic response to severe pain in a state of powerlessness. So when we find ourselves in a circumstance where we cannot change what's going on because we're powerless, and the pain is very severe, the defense that occurs to us is that it's repressed, meaning it gets pushed away from memory. So we don't have memory of it. So that's one way. The other way is denial. And denial is also an unconscious process. Many people don't understand that. We use it in regular language. Oh, you're denying this, denying that. But in truth, when denial is operating, it is something that happens unconsciously, just like repression. And the difference between repression, which is the memory is pushed away and you have no memory, and denial is that in denial, things are happening in front of you. There's evidence in front of you, but you refuse to acknowledge it. So you cannot see the truth of it. So you may decide that something is there that's not there, or you may decide that something is not there that is there. So we are pretty much all of us familiar with denial in people with addictions. So the person may say, no, I haven't been drinking and I'm perfectly fine to drive, when in fact it's obvious that they're not walking well, they're slurring their voice and they have been drinking. And when the person is in denial, again, I want to emphasize, they are not consciously doing this. Denial comes to protect. So in that case of the person, for example, with an alcohol addiction, they are refusing to see that they have a problem, even though there's quite a bit of evidence. They don't see it. They really don't see it. So what happens when this happens to us as children is that later in life, we have symptoms and we avoid circumstances. For example, an example that I can give you is somebody who never buys a house or never goes to a place that is more than one story. So they will never move to a house that's more than one story, because they are avoiding the experience of having somebody going up the stairs. And they may have absolutely no memory as to why this is, but the idea of somebody walking up the stairs creates a tremendous amount of emotion. It could be fear. And what they tell you is that they just don't like houses with 2 stories. They always have a perfect explanation that is not necessarily the truth, but it's an explanation that comes to them. And they will avoid it. So they will avoid having a house with 2 stories, for example. Or another example would be somebody who has to have always modern furniture. They cannot have anything old. That's another example. They will explain to you, they always have an explanation, or we always have an explanation, such as, I don't like old furniture. But in reality, there's something that gets triggered in the first case by somebody walking up the stairs. In the second case, by something that is triggering of the old furniture. And the person is avoiding it and having very strong emotions if they cannot avoid it. But they know that the emotion is very big. They experience that. But what they're trying to do is avoid the circumstance that would trigger. What is triggering is something that is repressed, therefore not known. So if you ask them why it is that they don't want the 2-story house, they will give you this explanation, but they know that something big happens to them if they're not able to control that. So, for example, for me, one thing that affects me is, and I have a patient right now who has the same difficulty, is the coloring of the sky. So at the end of the day, when it gets darker, that could be a trigger for me. Or when it's cloudy days, that is also a trigger for me. And I actually have no idea why. It just is one of the triggers that will evoke an intense feeling, in my case, of sadness. So you don't know why. And then when the experience happens, it actually is very uncomfortable, because not only do you have a tremendous intense feeling that's hard to deal with, but also because you don't understand why it's happening. So that's an example of repression. And in denial, you will deny something that's obvious to you or not see it. So for example, I've explained about people who are maltreated and they tell you about it and they don't seem to be able to do something about it and to do the right thing, like by stopping the person from maltreating them or whatever. That could be an example of denial, where the person doesn't really see the maltreatment. Now, everybody sees it, but the person is unable to see this is maltreatment, this is abuse. That would be an example of denial. Again, this is not a choice, so I really want to emphasize that in the case of that you don't have memory because it's pre-language, of course you have no choice in the matter, you just don't have language. Therefore, you don't have a story, you don't have a narrative. In the case of repression, the memory has been pushed away because it was too painful and you were in a state of complete powerlessness. So say, for example, that you have a father or a mother who was randomly abusive of you. And it wouldn't happen in particular circumstances, it would just happen randomly. It could happen with somebody who has an addiction problem. So the child is constantly experiencing these rages, let's say, or being attacked or being abused in some way, but they cannot prevent it because they don't know when it's going to happen. That's a state of powerlessness. So such a situation could be a situation where the child represses the tremendous fear, sadness, or anger that could have occurred because of those situations. So this is my motivation today to tell you about this, is to tell you and inform you that many of you might recognize that you have intense feelings. They could be intense sadness, that's the case for me. They could be intense fear. It could be intense, it could be anger. But whatever it is, it's intense and you know that it's quite intense, but you have no idea why it's happening. And again, what we tend to do is try to avoid those circumstances. This is no different to people who came back from Vietnam. And we came up with the diagnosis of PTSD, post-traumatic stress syndrome. That is exactly what happens to people who came back from Vietnam. All of a sudden, certain things trigger memories that are not fully processed. By the way, that's a part of it that I will talk about another day. The way to heal this is this needs to be processed. But when you're in these states as a child or in extreme traumatic conditions such as war, you cannot process it at that moment. So the memory is frozen. And that's how this happens. So this is a little glimpse into this area, just to let you know that indeed we can be experiencing emotions without knowing why. And that was my main purpose for telling you about this today. Okay, well, as always, if you think that this is helpful, please share it with others. You can subscribe, or you can ring the little bell. And you can definitely ask questions or make comments about this episode today, because that will help me address those questions or address those comments. That I assure you, when you make those comments or those questions, they're helping many other people. Other people don't ask the question or don't make the comment, but they're having the same thought as you. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you the next time. Bye.